Welcome, Professor Hirsch.
Yes.
It's a great honor for me to host you in our online conference because I'm following you for years. I'm very closely, following you, and I bring some books written by you. So we have my team and me, and very, very excited to host you. And we have so many questions, but in 25 minutes, we will finish our conversation and our lecture. That's why I have two important questions about education theory and the future of education. Professor Hirsch, my first question, maybe we can start with it, because your works, your studies are basically focusing on knowledge-based education and knowledge-based perspective, core knowledge perspective. And you prepared some programs, curriculums, and you implemented them in some schools, right?
Right.
Most of them in Maryland, as far as I know. But
oh, no, there are many hundreds of core knowledge schools in the United States now.
Yeah.
That book of yours is a little bit behind the times.
Okay. This is very important because not just, creating some theories, you are also implementing them in real environments, in real schools, climate. So congratulations, by the way. My first question is about your perspective. We are moving away from knowledge, and many education systems reorganize their system on a skill-based approach. In that sense, what is shared knowledge and what is the importance of the schools? Can you explain?
Yes, the classroom, I'm saying, should be a speech community, and so should a nation. So I'm glad you invited me to defend the idea of teaching a shared knowledge curriculum in the early grades, particularly. A short version of this talk is this: that every modern nation needs to insist upon a core curriculum for the very early grades. That does not mean that every school must teach from the very same books and booklets. That's an invitation to mind control. Instead, I would describe a chief aim of pre-collegiate education as being mind enabling and speech enabling by conveying the shared knowledge that's needed to communicate effectively in both speech and writing with one's compatriots and to understand them in return. That communicative ability is the opposite of mind control. It's the liberation of a people. If you take the current example of high communicability and shared knowledge in South Korea, they rank among the top 5 nations on the PISA test. The PISA test is given to 15-year-olds in reading as well as math and science. And they test number 5 in the world in reading, writing, arithmetic, and science. I would say that if the rioting protesters had not risen up en masse as they did, then that president turned dictator might well have taken charge. Dictatorships are less likely to prevail among those who can read and write well and who know human history. That was the view of the American educational system from the start. Thomas Jefferson, in the 18th century, was planning a school system for the state of Virginia. He stressed especially the subject of history. He said, history will show pupils that, and then I'm going to quote Jefferson, those entrusted with power have in time and by slow operations perverted it into tyranny, and it is believed that the most effectual means of preventing this would be to illuminate as far as practicable, the minds of the people, with knowledge of those facts of history from other ages and countries, that they may be enabled to know ambition under all of its shapes and be prompt to exert their natural powers to defeat its purposes. In other words, a smart tyrant wants low reading scores. Unfortunately, in my country, our reading scores went downhill in the late 1940s, and they have never reversed. So in this talk, I want to stress the scientific errors of the levels theory of reading. That's what allows people to stress skills, to say that there's a certain level of reading skills that you can reach, and that's what counts. And that turns to be not true scientifically. Our reading scores went down when we introduced so-called progressive education. John Dewey was the key philosopher. He conceded that the idea of progress in progressive education was taken from the historical progress that was projected in Hegel's philosophy. He also adopted the term child-centered education because of its orientation to the natural development of the individual child. But language, the key medium of education, is not individual. And now I think it would be good if you had my slides to show the slides of what happened when we took up that Dewey theory and started teaching what you might call the skills approach. In 1952 to 2012. Well, you can see what happened to that theory of there's a sort of skill theory of reading when we adopted it in the United States back in the 40s. And we're still scoring all too low in PISA. I mentioned that Korea was scoring 4 and 5. We tend to score anywhere from 25 to 17 in the world, and yet we have the means to if we wanted to spend money, if it's addressing our money, we have the means to do a lot better than that. In any case, language is a group acquisition. It's not individual. And one of the things that the skills approach tended to emphasize was that if you learn the skill at a certain level, then the means by which you did it could be individualized or could be different. It could be various. And so we changed the substance of our reading instruction. When our desks were all in a row, they faced the teacher and everybody in the class would respond. I don't know how it's set up in Turkey, whether your schools are all set up with the desk looking at the teacher, or whether you have these individual tables where 6 children sit at a time. That's the change we made in the furniture. And it also was the change in the actual reading matter that the children took. And that was a nation weakening mistake for the United States. Commonality of background knowledge is a fundamental necessity of human speech and human communication. It's essential to classroom-wide and nation-wide communicability. The comprehension of any concrete verbal communication requires unstated background knowledge, silently shared between speaker and listener, writer and reader. And if you don't have that shared background knowledge between speaker and reader and listener, the meaning of any text or utterance is inherently uncertain. So there's no such thing as a general reading level. There is no such thing as a general reading level. One either possesses the specific shared knowledge, and that's rather important for the notion of skills, as you will note. The widespread absence of commonly shared background knowledge is an invitation to illiteracy. The levels theory of reading was adopted to allow for individuality in the lesson plans, and that's another thing I would like you to see. We had the modern wonder books. You will see that slide. Everybody was given his or her own booklet to read on different, as the point was they were all at the same, supposedly at the same level. And that turned out not to work. So in any case, I'm going to go over that very rapidly so we can have a chat about it.
Yeah.
The child-centered approach needs to be replaced with an explicit knowledge approach, explicit, shared, cumulative knowledge that builds up shared knowledge and vocabulary.
By the way, Professor Hirsch, I'm interrupting, but as Enstitü Sosyal, we are not supporting child-centered education policies. We are supporting learning-centered policies. We have to focus on learning. We have to focus on knowledge, actually.
Oh, I see. Do you have a common curriculum?
We have, yes. In Turkey, we are using common curriculum. It is very important.
Well, you have learned everything that I want to say then, because a common curriculum where you're all reading the same topics and the same subject, I thought when you said skill that you meant this child-centered approach. But if you have all the same, if you're dealing with the same subject, then it has to be the same knowledge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how are your reading scores?
Our reading scores, we have common core, but in terms of core knowledge, we have some troubles, and we have to develop our system and develop our our problem is not the curriculum actually or common core. Our problem is about course books. The content of course books are a bit weak. That's why we can
hold on.
increase
Let me understand. Let me ask you, are you saying that the actual knowledge that is being conveyed in the schools is too diluted? Is that the point?
Can you ask again? I couldn't.
Well, I was wondering, are you saying the knowledge is not significant enough? You're all reading the same thing, but it's not substantive enough. Is that what your complaint?
Professor Hirsch, like many countries, Turkey are moving away from the knowledge-based perspective. We are closing to skill-based perspective, and
Yes.
this is dangerous for us, I think.
You're absolutely right. And I think I will send you, you will enjoy it. I was sent just 2 days ago a newspaper article from Great Britain. It was in the Daily Telegraph. And look, I won't even finish my little talk. You've already, let's discuss this, because you've already you've already achieved the only thing I wanted to suggest. Now your point is you need a more substantive curriculum. Is that what the long and short of it? And of course you're absolutely right. And I think for that, my advice or my comment on that is to recognize that you never can raise reading scores until there's a common knowledge base, because there's one special characteristic that the skills approach tends to miss. And I think you can, one very good example of what it is the inability of artificial intelligence to offer good translations from one language to another. I asked what we call ChatGPT. It's an artificial intelligence program, a very good one. I use it all the time. I asked it, how good are you in translating from one language to another? And they said, well, we're getting better, but so on and so on, but we haven't gotten there yet. Well, they're pretty far along in everything else, and not to be able to translate from Turkish into English is one of their drawbacks. Now, why is that? The reason that is a problem for artificial intelligence is that the use of language is not on the surface entirely. You cannot translate reliably one language to another until you have interpreted what the speech means. And you cannot interpret what the speech means until you understand its implications. Implications is a word that means folded in. It's not on the surface. You can't find out just by counting the words. So how do you fill in those words? And I would go back to some research in linguistics, which is very profound. There are a lot of the top researchers in psycholinguistics who point out that language has to take place within what they call a speech community. A speech community is a community where there is shared background knowledge. That's where implications are understood and come from. So what isn't on the surface of speech is understood. And that's why a solid, knowledge-rich education that everybody shares is necessary to speech communication. And so I think there's a very good reason you should win the knowledge versus skills argument just on that technical point. If you haven't got a great deal of unspoken shared knowledge, you cannot understand what the other person is saying. You cannot understand the implications of what the other person is saying. I think I'll stop there because that's the long and short of the issue, is shared background knowledge. You don't see it on the page, you don't hear it in spoken word, but it's absolutely essential to the understanding of speech. And it's absolutely essential to literacy. We just use that term. Literacy means the understanding of speech in writing and in the spoken word. And you cannot have a high degree of literacy, which is essential to democracy, to first-rate nationhood, to effectiveness, until that shared knowledge is imparted to everybody who can communicate. It's an equalizing principle. It's a highly democratic principle, but it's also a principle of personal and national effectiveness. So I think that practical side should win you the argument.
Yeah. By the way, Professor Hirsch, you talk about the importance of speech community, creating speech community. It is very important for the fill the language gap, right?
Right.
In that sense, teachers should be a great narrator, right?
They should be.
Teachers should be great narrator. Story.
Absolutely. Well, I would put it this way. Teachers should form their classroom into a speech community so that no child is being left behind. And if you have what's in effect a national curriculum, it seems to me that I don't know how detailed it is, and I don't know whether you all have to use the same book or not, but the children from disadvantaged circumstances and the children from very advantaged circumstances can nonetheless reach the same point if the classroom itself is a speech community where everyone is understanding at that time what the teacher is saying, what the books are saying. And that requires an understanding that all of those children have to be given a lot of the same background knowledge to understand the implications of what's being said in the classroom and what's being said in the books. And I would say that that connection of unspoken, unheard, unseen knowledge as the essence of what makes what is heard and read understandable.
Yeah.
That point about implication and shared knowledge is absolutely critical to the skills versus knowledge argument. And if you can show that the knowledge approach leads to much higher literacy, which is a very practical point, and I think that has been amply showed, and as I say, I'll send you that contrast of what they recently did in Great Britain, that your argument is one. And I think any disinterested person who hasn't got some kind of special interest in the subject would finally be brought round, because the evidence is now very, very clear on a massive scale.
Yeah. By the way, maybe we can give some information about your studies. Core Knowledge Initiative, you wrote a curriculum and books started from kindergarten to 6th grade, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is tremendous, gorgeous job, I think. Congratulations, by the way. Because many theorists around the world, they're just talking. They're not creating some solid, material, solid course books for implementation, So this is a very, very nice, initiative. I want to learn about the story of this initiative, Core Knowledge Program, and these books.
Okay, well, let's understand that there are many routes to the shared knowledge approach. The point is, though, for any child or in any place or in any country, there needs to be, because people move around, particularly in the United States, there has to be some agreement about sequence, about the knowledge sequence. What do you learn about in kindergarten? What do you learn about in 1st grade and 2nd grade and so on? Now, that is highly variable and it's somewhat arbitrary, but that's the very reason you have to get agreement, so that you can be coherent, particularly for disadvantaged children. That's a key point, is that they need the background knowledge that they may not get at home. They need that background knowledge to take the next step in the classroom. So there needs to be a national curriculum that responds to that principle, and not what you might call a national skills curriculum, but it needs to be a national knowledge curriculum, because shared knowledge, keep coming back to that phrase, shared knowledge is the essence of speech comprehension. And it is all shared knowledge that's often not spoken or written, but is in the background. And that background knowledge is the key to literacy versus illiteracy, and a right interpretation versus a wrong interpretation of speech. And that's why I think that little question, if you ask artificial intelligence why they cannot translate from one language to another, is that they're not using, in any particular case, just the right background knowledge to know what implications are trying to be conveyed. And to understand that very simple point, I think would solve a lot of our educational problems, because after all, education takes place in language. How else are we going to? I mean, it's marvelous that we can, look, this is happening between Charlottesville, Virginia, and and somewhere in Turkey, I don't know where
From Istanbul.
Istanbul.
Yeah.
So, I mean, isn't that remarkable that we are able to do this?
Yeah.
Presumably because we share a lot of background knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. My last question, in your book, let me show our audiences, by the way. This is the recent book, right, Professor Hirsch? Your recent book. Yeah. In your book, you have interesting analysis on the quality of teachers. You said the quality of teachers depends on the context. So you said a coherent context creates qualified teachers. Can you elaborate this analysis for our audience?
Now, you need the fact that you need to have the shared background knowledge for speech communication to occur is the basic principle. And once that principle is understood, then you cannot, let me give you a concrete example of how it works in practice and in school policy. If you take the idea of levels, which is very popular in the United States. So-and-so reads at a 6th grade level or an 8th grade level. And anything written at that level is okay. That's an incorrect point because speech and communication don't have levels. They have specific background knowledge that's needed to understand the implications of and the emphases of what's being said. I mean, irony is a pretty good example of that, where you mean the opposite of what you're saying. If that commonality does not exist, and if it isn't, and if the inculcation of the needed knowledge that goes through the grades is not carefully worked out so that people end up being highly communicative with one another, then that's the principle. I don't think there needs to be anything highly complicated about it. And you have a sequence of knowledge, therefore, that builds on itself in the classroom. I think that's an important principle for people who are making school curricula, is this coherence of building on what has gone before and coming out with the kind of expert citizen that you want to have as your colleagues.
By the way, Professor Hirsch, can we get some questions from our audience?
Please.
Yes. You mentioned some ideas about artificial intelligence, but one of our, audience, Gökhan Aldemir. Gökhan, the question is, for future of education nowadays, most of the schools uses artificial intelligence in order to increase quality of education.
I'm sorry, could you speak more slowly? Besides my bad equipment here, I also have bad.
I got it. So sorry. I'm repeating again.
Yeah.
For the future of education nowadays, most of the schools uses artificial intelligence in order to increase quality of education. What are your thoughts about this case?
Well, as I say, I think artificial intelligence is a marvelous tool, but it is not a very good tool for translation. And that is all is showing you where the limitations lie. That what you're teaching humans, well, let me turn to some data from another field, which is evolutionary psychology. And what they discovered is that human beings, unlike either artificial intelligence or other species of creature, that human beings have a kind of empathetic ability that neither machines nor, well, the nearest to humans are bonobos and chimpanzees, the higher apes. And none of those creatures has language. And the reason why language didn't develop in chimpanzees and bonobos is that they lacked this human ability to form communicative groups, making oneself understood to the other person. And the reason one is able to do that is you're making empathetic guesses to start with. There's a very fine research done by Elizabeth Spelke, who's a psychologist at Harvard, on what babies know. And babies, of course, don't start off knowing very much at all, but they do have this empathetic ability that humans have that other creatures don't have. And what is that? That is showing you already, I don't know whether AI will be able to overcome its chimpanzee-dom, so to speak, but until artificial intelligence gains that quality of shared intentionality, is the term that the evolutionary psychologists use, until they gain shared intentionality that humans have, AI is going to remain behind humans, at least in the field of translating language. And that is the way it stands now. It's interesting with AI that it isn't a reliable translator of language from one to another. That's because the unspoken, the implied, that was the theme of my talk, is so dominant in language.
Another question about your critics on constructivism. You harshly criticize constructivist theories. Can you give some examples about it? Why you criticize harshly constructivist theories?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what constructivism is, but let me ask, what aspect of constructivism
in education theories, constructivism, define themselves like learner construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiences and reflections. This is the definition of constructivism in education.
Well,
and
what does it? Let me ask this to the questioner. What difference does constructivism make for the character of the curriculum? Does it say that the child can construct his own knowledge by making his own curriculum? Or does it say, no, it's a way of dealing with a shared curriculum? And I don't care how you deal with a shared curriculum from the standpoint of pedagogy, as long as you succeed. But where constructivism goes wrong in suggesting the child does better if it creates its own curriculum is wrong from the standpoint of language. Language needs commonality, it needs shared knowledge. So you have to have a common curriculum for very young people, if you want them to learn the language. If you want everybody in the class to learn the language, and you don't have this discrimination between, constructivism has in its results has not been very good for equality, an equitable outcome for disadvantaged kids. In the United States, it's had a terrible record on being able to overcome home disadvantage.
Professor Hirsch, actually, we have some different, questions, but I don't want to bother you, and I don't want to make you exhausted because of this, lecture. Thank you so much for your joining us. It's very, interesting and very educational lecture for me. Especially, I noted shared intentionality. It is very important. Maybe after shared knowledge, we should use shared intentionality against AI.
Yes,
Strong
the
against
term
AI.
is, yes, shared intentionality. Yes, that's a really good. And let me mention that the people, Michael Tomasello, who's an evolutionary psychologist of distinction, that's the term that he and his colleagues came up with, and it's very valuable. It's also the work of Hirsch'i at Harvard, who's an evolutionary psychologist, is also very worth looking into.
Okay. Professor, thank you so much.
Well, it was
And
a pleasure.
I
Sorry.
hope to, by the way, I hope to host you in Istanbul.
Oh, how nice. It's a pleasure.
Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.